Hey, Wrecker here. Okay, so I am running really late today because I started reviewing for one story to work on, even though I technically should be working on the first chapter of book two of a nanite in a fantasy. Uh, I am not because, well, let's be honest here. I'm a little burned out on it. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but I need a break from it because I just finished editing the epilogue for it today. So I'm rereading all my stuff to work on Three Worthless Heroes, Chapter 2. And only to discover that, oh wait, all my notes are completely out of order. I have no idea what actually needs to be done next. So I start fixing my notes and start fixing my notes and start fixing my notes and realize, okay, my notes are a lot more out of order than I originally thought. So I get hunting through all of my notes, trying to figure out what I need to do next, and finally figure out my next series that I need to work on that needs editing. So we're gonna edit that for a little bit, probably for about an hour or so, and I'm going to probably call it there. I know it's not the most interesting thing in the world, but yeah, it's just I kind of screwed up. Yeah. And there's not a lot I can do about fixing it at the moment. Actually, hold on. Let me change the stream title. I have that linked document. Connected Universe Anthology CH2. Now if I go here, yes, yes, I know that's not much of a thing. It's more a general idea I was having. No, let's do the editing. Sorry. Sorry I keep changing my mind. It's just I remembered I needed to do that, and I thought, oh, I could do that instead. I knew that doesn't take a lot of mind, a lot of focus and effort. But then I'm like, but it's another The Last Guardian thing, and I still kind of really need to rest from that for a few weeks because I am completely burnt out. Do not get me wrong. I have no plans on abandoning it. It's just I need a break. from that story. I love it, but I just realized I never tested my mic. Shoot. Test, test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Has anyone even been able to hear me? Test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Okay, so you guys could hear me, or at least I assume you could. I did some settings change, uh, but for some reason it wasn't transferring over to my headset. No idea why. Volume's not muted. What's the output on this thing? Set to. Okay, well that fixes that. For those who are just joining us, I'm going to be working on my story, Nanite and the Fantasy, today.
It had been almost a week since the incident with the insects attacking Sam's forest, and the higher-ranking Noble Gray had warned her about had finally shown up. Been almost a week since the incident with the insects attacking Sam's forest, and the
Okay, hold
higher-ranking
on. I'm
Noble
having a small issue with my headset. Hold on. I don't know. That carried over. I don't think I lost you guys or dropped the stream. I don't know. That carried over. I don't think I lost you guys or dropped the stream. Am I super quiet now? That carried over. I don't think I lost you guys or dropped the stream. Am I? Test, 1, 2, test, 1, 2. Okay, so I think I got my sound issues fixed. So my headset was trying to wirelessly and uh, so my headset has a dongle, but it also has Bluetooth compatibility. I forgot to check which mode it was in when it was trying to broadcast on both, which was causing the weird sound issues I was having on my end. I don't know how much of that carried over to you guys. But yeah, for those of you joining us, I'm working on my nanite in a fantasy story. There's a link to it in the chat. It follows a character named Sam who gets isekai into a fantasy world as a nanite swarm. Now, it's not the unstoppable gray goo type nanite swarm, but instead a more believable nanite swarm based on what we believe would be physically possible using actual real world technology.
Had been almost a week since the incident with the insects attacking Sam's forest, and the higher-ranking Noble Gray had warned her about had finally shown up with one of the resource convoys. And the higher-ranking Noble Gray had warned her about had finally shown up with one of the resource.
I'm just going to be doing editing today because, like I said, my notes, I don't know how much carried over. But I went to set up. This was prepped, ready, was reviewing my previous chapters, so I had everything straight in my head, reviewing my notes, and realized my notes were out of order.
One of the resource convoys, which had only gotten more frequent. which had only gotten more frequent not only because they were attempting to restore the original trade route, but because Sam had proven herself a valuable asset, loose rock or broken brick trade route, but because Sam had proven herself a valuable asset, loose rock or broken bricks, damaged swords, or rusty farm tools could render them.
That's what didn't sound right.
She could render them all down and make new ones out of the base material. 2 or 3 carts of rubble and brick would come in, and a single cart of perfectly shaped sewn bricks and slabs would leave out pallets of rusty metal bent and destroyed equipment would come in, and almost equal number of new identical weapons would leave out most of the smithy. Almost equal number of new identical weapons would leave
It's only now I realize you guys can't see some of the windows I have. Huh. It's only now I realize you guys can't see some of the windows I have. My Grammarly pop-ups don't even show up on the stream.
Most of the smithies were annoyed, as they said the weapons were soulless. They were just blades, barely able to be classified as weapons, all identical in form and identical in stats. They were just blades, barely able to be classified as weapons, all identical in form and identical. All were identical in form and identical in stats. They gave no bonus, they gave no boost stat-wise, and they gave no bonus, they gave no boost stat-wise. An identical blade forged by apprentice blacksmith would be superior, though begrudgingly. Any identical blade forged by apprentice blacksmith would be superior, though begrudgingly. Though begrudgingly, not by much, but the sheer speed of output made those minute bonuses all but mute, and they could prioritize the slight.
Minute. The minute differences. Okay, so they're spelled the same.
though begrudgingly not by much, but the sheer speed of output made those minute bonuses were all but mute. And they could always prioritize the slightly better forged weapons for higher ranking. Ranking or higher value individuals rather than having to give them to farmhands drafted from the local fields. The official that showed up The official that showed up in, for lack of a better word, an showed up in, for lack of a better word, an ornamental armored carriage, something that was definitely way too heavy to move under Sam's understanding of medieval material science. On closer inspection, something that was definitely way too heavy to move under Sam's understanding of medieval material science. On closer inspection, it had actual shocks, compressed springs similar to what you On closer inspection, it had actual shocks, compressed springs similar to what you might find in an automobile in the late 1900s, and had actual tires, instead of the wooden wheels she was used to seeing on the supply wagons, though she wasn't sure what they
Pretty good. I'm working on my story, a nanite and a fantasy. Basically, the main character uh, gets isekai into a fantasy world as a nanite swarm. Well, it's not like the gray goo, all devouring nanite swarm we commonly see in sci-fi. It's more like the what we could theoretically have if we ever managed to get them properly working in the real world.
Though she wasn't sure what they were made of, but she was pretty sure they weren't filled with air and rubber as the material was blue, not a dyed blue either. At least she was pretty sure it was.
I'm just doing editing today, so yeah, it's just going to be a lot of listening and fixing. If you spot any errors or have any questions, feel free to ask, though. I'll keep my eye on chat.
And not a dyed blue either. At least she was pretty sure it wasn't dyed. She really wanted to get her hands on the material just to figure out what. Wanted to get her hands on the material just to figure out what.
True. Uh, this is only the 11th chapter in the story, and I still got a ways to go. I did, however, here recently put the last chapter of book one of my stories, The Last Guardian, on my Patreon, and it should be available on the free to read sites uh, in a little bit.
Her hands on the material just. Her hands on the material just to figure out what the heck it was, but that was something she'd have to question Gray about later, while the filigree.
Tell me about it. I can put out a chapter worth of writing in a few hours, but actually making it presentable takes a heck of a lot of work. All this, all 6 pages of this, I probably wrote in a little over an hour and a half. Not that hard, but editing it is going to take a fair bit longer. And I'm only on the first page of this chapter.
While the filigree and design of the carriage was impressive, it was definitely meant for combat, or at the very least to survive combat. Heavy metal doors on each with heavy metal doors on each side with a slit that could either be fired through or opened to see out an ornate, almost for lack of a better word, cubic pumpkin-like shape made up its exterior, with what looked like a metal cathedral roof complete with 4 water-spewing gargoyles for drains. It was simultaneously the most gaudy thing she had ever seen, and probably the most well-defended, pulled by a massive lizard-like beast covered in metal armor.
If you have any questions about the story itself, uh, feel free to ask, or you can click on the link. I think I have through either chapter 8 or through chapter 9 free to read on the website.
Almost for lack of a better word, cubic pumpkin-like shape made up its exterior. With what looked like a metal cathedral roof complete with 4 water-spewing gargoyles for drains, it was simultaneously the most gaudy thing she had ever seen, and probably the most well like a metal cathedral roof complete with 4 water-spewing gargoyles for drains. It was simultaneously the most gaudy thing she had ever seen, and simultaneously the most gaudy thing she had ever seen, and probably the most well-defended, pulled by a massive lizard-like beast covered in metal armor that was pulled by a massive lizard-like beast covered in metal armor that looked like a cross between a six-legged armadillo and a triceratops. It literally just rolled over anything that got in its way. The undead were that literally just rolled over anything that got in its way. The undead were unable to slow. The undead were unable to slow it down and really put into merit just how outclassed the undead hordes were against the various sentient races. The problem was that the undead were systemic, and since they didn't stop to properly destroy most, if not all, would get The problem was that the undead were systemic, and since they didn't stop to properly destroy most, if not all, would get back up again later. The undead in their own right were not threats. Their ability to really threats their ability to SAP. Ability to sap and corrupt life.
Mostly, I do a mix of sci-fi and fantasy, or more accurate, magic versus science. Um, my three main titles, which this is one of, and are actually in a connected universe with each other. Though not set on the same world, they are in a connected universe. Is a nanite fantasy, this one, The Last Guardian, a sci-fi one, and a and Class Tanker. A nanite in the fantasy follows a human from Earth who gets isekai into a fantasy world. Um, but as a bit of a bargain to try and keep their memories, they agree to be reduced to nothing more than a single drop of a nanite swarm with their consciousness held inside a crystal to act as sort of the core, powering and driving the swarm, since they can't start off with a computer. And slowly they build up from there. The Last Guardian, which I just finished writing book 1 for, follows, I believe it was A23-I, or Austin. a sci fi battleship AI who crash lands on a fantasy world and is awakened several hundreds of years later by a human girl after he believes humanity had all but been wiped out centuries before. There's a reason for that, but I haven't gotten to that point in the story yet, so it's a bit spoilery. But the short of his book is he's trying to set himself up, fix what he can, and take care of the village while a literal horde of monsters are on his doorstep. I'm glad to hear you like it. The last one, and this one's more fun to write, I think, is called a class tanker. At the age of 16, everyone gets a class by just killing one monster. Well, you can get it previously, but there's a whole rite of passage, coming of age thing that happens in Nyla's, the main character's, village. Upon her 16th birthday, she stabs a horned rabbit trapped in a cage and unlocks her class. Though instead of getting one of the four starter classes, fighter, mage, archer, or warrior, she gets an advanced class called tanker, which seems to be a support class. But everything her class can do is heavily built around her monopole. But, because it's an advanced class, her monopole is barely growing every level up. So she's forced to deal with an incredibly powerful class that is so stupid gas guzzlery that she can barely use a single bit of its power. But once she actually gets the ball rolling, well, let's just say there's a reason why the class's name is Tanker. And that's as much as I can give without getting into spoiler territory on that one. But yeah, those three all exist within the same universe, not the same world. They don't even use the same magic system. I actually explained this in an anthology chapter I put out recently. That the gods of various worlds based the magic system, the level ups, the whole thing, off a stolen system that they got called the Gaia system. The Gaia system, however, was built with humanity in mind and was hijacked to be usable by other races. And since the gods didn't have a fair enough understanding of how it worked, they basically tweaked it to their own desires as much as they could, and then just started isekaiing humans to act as a loophole to get everything running again. Or to get everything running. Which explains why there's humans in these fantasy worlds to start with. Sam, the main character of this story, is actually a human from a Martian colony. And has a fair understanding of robotics from her previous job, which is going to be important later. Sorry, I will ramble a lot if you give me half a chance about my stories. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I need to get back to work on this.
Forced to turn their own kills into allies and inability to be The undead in their own right were not really threats. Their ability to sap and corrupt life force to turn their own kills into allies and inability to be permanently killed without rendering the corpse down to next to nothing. Even if you defeated them, the victory was always short.
On the other hand, was a different story. Well, I'm glad you're interested in it. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask me about them, or you can check out my Royal Road account. The link will take you to the nanite and the fantasy story, but actually all of my stories, including my non like focused down main titles, are over there as well. I have a few side stories that are tenuously connected to it, like A Seed in the Void, which is basically just like a story I decided I wanted to write as a bit of a refresher, which follows a world tree seed that wakes up after its planet has been destroyed in the vacuum of space and is trying to survive there, becoming a very biotech survivalist type story. Or Sparks in the Dark, which is actually based in an abandoned AI testing facility that predates Austin, but was built to test the prototypes that would later go on to become what Austin is. It also gives a more scientific understanding of how the timeline works in general. While it's not required or even directly connected to the other three, it's supposed to be more like a filler story to give information that I couldn't find a good way to fit into the other one, while having a generally fun idea of what if I blended Cogmind and Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead together.
Undead in their own right were not really threats. Their ability to sap and corrupt life force and turn their own kills into allies, and their life force while turning their own kills into allies, and their inability to be permanently killed without rendering the corpse down to next to nothing on the other hand was a different story. Even
Oh, if you're wondering what the yellow is, that is basically me marking what has got a first um, first edit, which I really should see if I can't break this apart. Yeah, that should be good. It's not perfect, but at least it's not one giant run on paragraph no more. I'll see if I can't break it up more on my second time through. I'm just fixing the big glaring errors right now.
Even if you defeated them, the victory was always short-lived, and unless you could fight using something like fire or acid, you had to take time out of your fight to dispose of them, lest by the time you finished dealing with the next enemy, the one you previously defeated would get back up. They continue this process.
The undead in this aren't, like, indestructible. You do damage to the body by killing them. Yeah, when they get back up, they might be a little slower, a little weaker, but they're going to get back up. Unless the majority of the body is destroyed, it can uh, continue to function as an undead. Even if you chop the limbs off of it, so long as the majority of the torso is intact, it will basically just sit there, sucking the life out of the land around it and feeding that energy into any undead that come by it. So, yeah. Undead bad. Not a powerful threat on their own. But when they start numbering in the hundreds or thousands, that becomes a problem. And the corpses, as they drain energy, can even mend or grow new ones. Something died. The soil is made of degraded biomass, and you'd be hard pressed to find a square inch of land that something at some point hasn't died on. And human or Bipedal corpses are the minority, not the norm. If something is powerful enough to raise an undead, they can literally just convert soil back into a corpse. Usually a skeleton or a very rotted out husk. That is basically just smash and it's gone for good. But so long as it sticks around for long enough, it'll go from just being that hauled out corpse to an actual undead to eventually growing into something stronger that might be able to do the same. It really just depends on energy. Which here's the real scary part. Just because you kill the undead doesn't mean that energy they had in them goes away. Usually it'll stick around as sort of like a fog and try to restore the corpse. But if it can't restore the corpse, it'll move into the next nearest undead. So the longer you fight and the more undead you kill, the passively stronger the undead get. Now, it's usually just a bonus, but if that undead ends up stuck there for a period of time, it might, I wouldn't go to the form of evolving, but become something else, which makes them really scary. Thus, they're an exponential threat. Once they get rolling, they become a bigger problem.
Just throwing numbers at the problem, and to the problem finally stopped moving, unfortunately. Problem till the problem finally stopped moving, unfortunately, in this case the problem with every Unfortunately, in this case the problem with every living thing the undead came across was every living thing the undead came across, and while you could kill the undead, they'd still blight the land, sucking out its very life force to fuel the resurrection or creation of more undead. The purifier prototype
Blight, and I don't feel like this is a spoiler, by the way, Blight will slowly break down over time. Say a bunch of undead pass through a field, sucking it dry of all its life essence. Within, say, a year or two, the blight will recede, and the dead grass. Problem is, the dead grass will just rot at that point. But new grass won't instantly sprout up there. It's got to spread from where it's still healthy or be carried there either by a druid, some sort of mage helping out, or a regular farmer. Just had to be purposely replanted. Dead forests do not produce good wood. It's only good for blighted forests are only good for firewood. They can't be used for construction. They can't be used for furniture. So they prioritize chopping them down so they can plant healthy trees there that can be. So on and so forth. Blight isn't a huge problem once the undead are gone. It's the mounds of corpses and dead plant life and arid, unusable land they leave in their wake that are problems. Yeah, given a few years, it can be fixed, but it still takes
The
years.
problem was every living thing the undead came across. And while you could kill the undead, they'd still blight the land, sucking out its very life force to fuel the resurrection or creation of more undead. The purifier prototype Sam had been working.
The point of the purifier isn't to cleanse lands, at least not yet. It's to push back the blight, keep it from spreading. Basically, it converts blight into charged mana stones, or crystals, sorry, which mages can use for spells, or to run artifacts.
The purifier prototype Sam had been working with had done a lot at pushing that back as the walls around the valley grew closer to completion. All she had to do was locate wherever this necrotic energy was the thickest and set up the purifier there. Well, they couldn't complete.
Something as basic as a castle wall, well, it can't keep blight out, it can keep it from spreading. Think of blight like a fog. It can creep in, but it's got to get over the walls. It's got to push back against the living things. A physical wall, while it wouldn't stop the blight from spreading beyond it, was or is a very decent barricade at slowing it down.
As the walls around the valley grew closer to completion, all she had to do was locate wherever this necrotic energy was the thickest and set up the purifier there. Well, they couldn't completely. While they couldn't completely eliminate the energy from the valley, they were actually pushing it back at this point, and with the wall construction nearing completion and the assortment of mana crystals, she had been able.
I should mention a bit of basic understanding. Sam set up shop in a nearby forest, and started tending to it as a bit of a hobby. Now, colloquially known as Sam's Garden, the forest is a haven for life magic and is a big, glowing beacon for the undead. Sam did their best to push it back, as did the local inhabitants of the forest. But they got beat up pretty bad. And Sam simply didn't have the numbers to cover a large amount of territory. So even using smarter tactics, hit and runs, getting drones, and even creating combat capable robots, combat being a loose term, because most of the stuff they face are just low grade zombies. They haven't really pushed it. They were still losing ground until the humans showed up. Working with the humans, things started improving, but still, they haven't managed to take any territory back yet. Okay, I need to take a quick bio break. I'll be right back. Okay, and I'm back. Sorry about that, just needed to take a quick bio break.
And with the wall construction nearing completion and the assortment of mana crystals she had been able to gather from the various monsters in the dungeon, as well as Gray's connections, she had started to set them up behind the completed sectional wall feeding. Gather from the various monsters in the dungeon, as well as with the wall construction nearing completion and the assortment of mana crystals she had been able to gather from the various monsters in the dungeon, as well as Gray's connections, she had started to set them up behind the completed sectional wall feeding. Directly the completed sectional wall feeding directly into her power grid, which only helped her further scale up her industrialization. She had even set up an She had even set up an assembly line for spears, pikes, and swords within the adventurers' encampment. The machine was simple, but it gave some of the adventurers, like the blacksmith, something to do as they studied. She had even set up an assembly line for spears, pikes, and swords within the adventurers' encampment. The machine was simple, but it gave some
Please do not put bots in my chat. Or please don't have bots spam the chat.
The machine was simple, but it gave some of the adventurers like the blacksmith something to do as they studied her technique while working with her to increase their own available tools. The assignment line. The machine was simple, but it gave some of the adventurers like the blacksmith something to do as they studied her technique while working with her to increase their own available tools. The assignment line was pretty.
Assembly line.
The assembly line was pretty simple. A set of molds would be filled with The machine was simple, but it gave some of the adventurers, like the blacksmith, something to do as they studied her technique while working with her to increase their own available tools. The assembly line was pretty simple. A set of molds would be filled with liquid metal. Once the molds were cooled, they would be opened, and if the components were in decent enough shape, a set of mechanical arms would cut, sharpen, and shine them. While in theory, they were more prone to failure than Sam using nanobots.
Or if one of the smiths weren't particularly busy, it hand them off to them to do the same.
theory, they were more prone to failure than Sam using nanobots to print them and required more reprocessing. They could produce over a dozen swords in each batch, where Sam could only print a single item at a time.
due to the lack of their processing power.
The increased power from each collector, she'd be able to set up more though at the moment she was focusing. Though at the moment she was focusing on industrializing the former Goblin's cave, making parts for her aerial drones and dog drones, as well as printing something special her units had proved. Her units had proved themselves in combat against the undead, but against the insect monsters they had been sorely lacking, and she couldn't guarantee the protection of the adventurers forever. Right now she was a convenient ally, but who knew where their loyalties.
And with that, it's literally the middle of the night here, so I guess I should probably call the stream here. So yeah, I think that's it for now. Until then, this is Wrecker, signing off.